Lavender, queer life culture.
Welcome to Toasted Lavender Podcast. I'm Kai, pronouns he, him, and I'm going to be hosting today's episode.
I'm Lisa. My pronouns are she, her.
I've been tapped on the shoulder to remind you that I am Lindsay and my pronouns are she, her. Sorry, I was
Everything's okay.
doing things.
My name's Alex, and my pronouns are she and her.
And tonight, we would like to give a shout out to TF Brewing, Templin Family in Salt Lake City. We're all drinking the Haze Series Batch Number 4 Imperial IPA. And it's awesome.
As with any beer from TF.
Yeah, they never let me down. They're so good.
I can't say that about everybody.
Yeah,
It's
for
in
sure.
a really pretty, like, turquoise can that looks like a mermaid's tail.
And I'm wearing mermaid socks. Merman socks.
Yes, you are. We will post a picture in the show notes, which, by the way, if you want to send us beer money, patreon.com/toastedlavenderpodcast. But I also just want to say that when you hear us talk about show notes, those are available on Patreon and to Patreon subscribers. So we talk about it a lot. We say we'll put that in the show notes. If you've ever wondered where the hell are these show notes, that's where they are.
I'd like to start out with a question for everybody. Just when you think of pride, where did it begin? When did it start?
It was one of the seven deadly sins.
Oh, I like this answer.
They made a whole movie about all these sins.
Didn't they write a book?
There's probably a book.
Wow. Okay, how about gay pride specifically?
Interesting.
LGBTQ pride?
Interesting, yeah, okay. I see where we're going
That was
here.
good.
For me, I would say San Francisco 2013.
Oh.
Because that was my first pride.
Oh, okay. Fair. Okay.
I thought the first one was in the 70s.
All right.
I don't know.
New York?
Yeah. But, I mean, for me, like, personally, it was Salt Lake in the mid to late aughts.
All right. I got some answers I wasn't expecting, and I like that. That's good. So you mentioned New York in the 70s. A lot of people think of Stonewall when the black trans women threw a brick through the window in 1969. That pride started there. That's kind of what...
As a protest.
Yeah, as a protest. However, 3 years before Stonewall, there was the Compton's Cafe Riot. It happened on the opposite coast in the Tenderloin district of San Francisco on a summer night in August of 1966. So you got close with your 2013 San Francisco.
You did?
Just a few years off. At least the city was right.
That, never mind.
It's the first known instance of militant queer resistance to police harassment in U.S. history. And the trans people, drag queens, and street kids were literally fighting for a right to gather. So we're gonna go all the way through the backstory, and then at the
Can
end,
we revisit the word militant?
yes,
Because I just imagined, like, some camouflage.
Berets.
The black grease under their eyes.
Yeah.
That's football, Lisa.
I feel like if someone's
It's
gonna
kind of the
loot
same.
something, they have that too.
many trans or queer people in general had started moving to San Francisco in the 60s because it was a place where they could surround themselves with similar individuals and find families amongst each other.
Is
often
this the Castro?
I'm very glad you brought that up because no, it is not the Castro. And we're going to talk about
If
that.
we were on a game show, you would have hit the button that made the noise.
the red button.
Yeah, you're wrong.
And
You're
green
wrong.
slime falls down.
If it was Nickelodeon, I would have gotten slimed.
Yeah, slimed you. So they were going there because they could find similar people and kind of build their own queer family structures after often being ousted from their own families. In the 60s, the Tenderloin district was a red light district and a place where people came for all kinds of entertainment, legal or not. There were a lot of theaters, performance halls, a lot of sex work happening, and
Tenderloin. Do you remember when we stayed in San Francisco and we had to walk through the Tenderloin from the show that we went to? And it was like a big deal. Everybody was making it a big deal, like walking through the Tenderloin at night.
and it's
I
still
think I do. Yeah. Yeah.
Like it's
And it
dangerous.
was-
any travel guide would
it was a
tell
little
you
sketchy.
not to go like to
sketchy.
the.
We
if you're
did it,
going there,
and we
not to go.
survived.
Isn't that where we found that sushi place?
No, this was after the show. We were walking back to the hotel, and there's a lot of riffraff.
I remember
There were
it
a lot of
smelled
people talking to
of urine
themselves.
a lot.
Yeah, there were a lot of people talking to themselves.
Okay.
There were a lot of people just hanging out on the sidewalk, and we'd have to
Interesting.
walk past and sort of not make eye contact.
So where is this within the city? Do you know
It's
geographical?
it is
It's
like,
like-
downtown
yes.
San Francisco, like super
Yeah.
downtown San Francisco, and it's what your guys' points that you're bringing up are interesting because really, if you asked any travel guide or anybody that's helping you plan a trip there, they would be like, stay out of the Tenderloin district. But on the contrary, they have like organized and are really fighting against gentrification, and it's one of the few neighborhoods that is in that area where is any affordability whatsoever for. And yes, there are a lot
Yeah,
of
and
people experiencing homelessness. There's still a lot of super queer people in that area. It's kind of like, I don't know, the reject area where people
nobody bothered us though, and that was the thing. Is like, and that's how that's how I feel about Ogden.
yeah
everybody's
nobody bothers us.
Ogden's so terrible. Why would you want to live there? It's like the armpit of Utah is how it's been referred to. And I
Keep it
kind of
as a
felt
hidden
that way
gem.
when I walked through. Like, everybody's telling us not to be here after dark, and we were there. And like, yeah, there's obviously issues. There are people there that have issues, but like nobody bothered us. It wasn't like
Yeah.
I felt like we were gonna be robbed or
ravaged
something.
as you're
Yeah,
walking.
no, it's
Yeah.
just like people trying to get by, and yeah. So that's my story about the Tenderloin.
And I've never been there, but after like doing the research for this episode, I'm like, I need to go there. Like, I want to go on a vacation to that place so I can take it all in. In the Tenderloin district, there were a bunch of residential hotels where all these performers and drag queens and trans women and street kids kind of took up housing. And again, it was because this was where they could afford to be. So the Vietnam War was going strong. San Francisco had a huge influx of soldiers stationed there. And then wartime is always a boom time for prostitution because of that. There's a bunch of people away from home and stationed here.
It's like the Super Bowl.
Yeah. Police were cracking down on soldiers and sailors, especially at trans and drag clubs. The police were targeting trans sex workers and arresting them literally for any chance they could get. Some of the silly things I read about were like some of these trans women being arrested for obstructing the sidewalk. So literally just like
Standing
walking,
there.
yeah,
Yeah.
like being on the sidewalk. They'd get arrested for female impersonation, and they would be asked to present ID all the time, and of course they didn't have an ID that matched their gender identity, so they were just like kind of stuck in this constant battle of discrimination that they couldn't get out of. Many of them relied on sex work to survive because they literally couldn't get other employment because of these barriers of not having identification cards and racism and just discrimination against them as transgender people in general.
I found a map. So this is the Castro down there. Dolores Park, that's like the big gay hangout. The Tenderloin is up there.
All right. Thank you for that.
You're welcome.
So I'm glad you showed us that because we're going to talk about how shitty and gatekeepy the Castro is.
Let me guess, are there a bunch of white gay men that
White
live there?
cis gay men. Yep. So other gay organizations like the Mattachine Society and the Daughters of Bilitis that were kind of products of the Lavender Scare. These two organizations, the Daughters of Bilitis was kind of the lesbian organization, and the Mattachine Society was the gay man society, and they were founded by people that were wrongfully terminated from government positions. But by this time, we're in 1966. These two organizations had some credibility. They had started to make a little bit of legal organization that was helping the gay causes. But that being said, they were kind of taking the attitude that they should work together with the police, and we're looking down on the people in the Tenderloin district, kind of like how Gloria Steinem didn't want the lesbians to join the feminists. Like it was a similar gatekeepy thing. Yeah, it was a similar gatekeepy thing of like, well, we're established and fancy and middle class and
they're
uppity,
starting to get some clout,
and we're starting to get some clout, and we don't want these dirty, seedy, icky weirdos to take away from our movement.
There's a phrase where it's like you climb the ladder and then you pull it up behind you.
Yep. Yeah. And that sounds exactly like what was happening.
Yeah.
So there were fear-mongering TV news reports describing the Tenderloin district as a hotbed for homosexuals and transvestites who engage in the marketplace of vice, degradation, and human misery.
Oh.
Like,
and then people are like, we should go there.
Yeah. Well, let's go have some fun. So, Compton's, the cafe, was a 24-hour place that was super centrally located. It was right by the drugstore where you could go get your press-on eyelashes, and it was really close to these hotel situations where a lot of them lived, and it was really close to all these clubs where many were performing, and it was close right to the heart of like where they were doing, picking people up for sex work. So it was in a really good central location. And trans women, drag queens, and people experiencing homelessness would come hang out for hours and, kind of order a 60-cent cup of coffee every 3 hours. Just, they would sit for a long time without spending much money and, to catch up and hang out. It was a neighborhood hangout for these specific.
A warm place to be.
A warm place to be, a well-lit place to be, a safe place to be, kind of, I guess.
Yeah.
Tamara Ching, who is a San Francisco activist, was a regular at Compton's during the time, and her quote about it was, it was good to go and be seen and talk to people about what happened during their night to make sure everybody's okay, everyone made their coins, everyone's coming down off of drugs and didn't overdose, and that you didn't go to jail that night or be violently assaulted by
It's like the
someone
town
that-
square.
Right.
Yeah.
It's like everyone's
It's like
checking
this
in.
is
Yeah.
the check-in place for this community. And then Vanguard is a queer organization, was a queer organization that described itself as an organization of, by, and for the kids on the street. Its goal was to offer self-worth and mutual support for its members so they would help each other with resources, and they were quite organized. They spent a lot of time cleaning up the streets of San Francisco because they viewed that as their home. Like they didn't have a roof to go sleep under. The streets were their home, and they wanted to keep that nice. So that was kind of like part of their thing, is that they were cleaning up the streets. And the organization got involved with Compton's Cafe during the summer of 1966 when tensions began to rise between the Compton's staff management and the patrons. And the management started charging a service charge for each customer taking up a seat. And, you know, they justified that as, we need to make up for our loss of income from these campers that are sitting here taking up real estate.
Yeah, that's a
problem-
hard position to be in.
The problem was that they applied the charge in a discriminatory manner. They would single out,
It wasn't everyone that came through the door.
yes, they would single out people that were non-conforming or that were especially wacky or whatever.
Right.
And then they also hired, the management of the restaurant hired security guards to harass the street kids, particularly the trans street kids. And more often, the management would call the police to intervene. Like, come rouse these people up and get them out of here. So Vanguard, this youth street organization, organized a picket of the restaurant to protest the treatment of the patrons. And they organized with a bunch of ministers and some older members of some of these other gay organizations that had a little more clout, like tried to organize this picket, which was organized well, and they carried it out. And the management didn't give a fuck. They just didn't change anything. It just kind of fell upon deaf ears. They didn't care. Tensions were mounting.
What they should have done is do like a pancake special from 1 a.m. to 5 a.m. where you get like pancakes and coffee for $1.50 or whatever.
Right.
Right.
And then you'd sell a
Money.
bunch of food.
Right, in an hour that you wouldn't normally sell any food in. And
Thank you for coming to my TED Talk.
so the incident itself started when the staff of Compton's became particularly annoyed with a table of queens who were being too loud and, again, spending a lot of time there without spending a lot of money. The staff called the police, and when the police arrived, a policeman grabbed a trans woman by the arm and started to, like, pick her up to just, started
Wrestle her,
manhandling her
yeah.
and, like, pulling her out. She was fed up, threw her hot, scalding coffee in his face. So, you can imagine.
So that's a felony.
The place erupted. Tables were overturned. People were throwing tables and furniture like out the windows, sugar shakers out the windows. And
I like that you said sugar shakers and not salt shakers.
well, it's a
They're
coffee
having
shop.
Yeah.
And it's like those bigger, the bigger
I like
ones
those-
that have the yeah.
Gotcha.
And
Much more destructive.
yeah, much bigger.
Right.
So the police retreated out of the cafe to call for backup. And then the crowd in the cafe, it was busy night. It was like 50 or 60 people came out after the police, chased them out of the cafe, and this riot ensued in the streets. And before it was over, a police car was completely destroyed. A newsstand on the street was lit on fire and burned to the ground. And this establishment's windows and doors, all the glass just shattered. The police paddy wagoned many queens that night. So, the aftermath of this event, it was not in vain. There were some really cool things that came out of it. So a network of social, psychological, and medical support services was established, and in 1968 that led to what was called the National Transsexual Counseling Unit. And that was like the first known trans peer-run support advocacy network ever. Like that's been documented that we know of. The National Transsexual Counseling Unit had some interesting police liaison work that they were doing, which was I found this cop named Elliot Blackstone, who was in that role of like being, kind of in between the police department and this community, and worked with gay organization leaders to establish, kind of to put an end to like cops going in and cruising for guys to come into the bathroom and like, oh, you're trying, entrapment. That's the word I'm looking for. So that was like one of his big things. He also, this guy was, he kind of seemed like a saint, honestly. Like he started like buying hormones for people that couldn't afford them, for trans people that couldn't afford them. And he did a lot for the community, I'm sure. Yeah, he was a cop. And he ended up being fired from his cop position at some point for some...
He was way too friendly.
Sure, it was completely legitimate.
Yeah, it wasn't at all.
They're like, you didn't do your paperwork right.
Yeah, and again, this isn't about Elliot Blackstone, but he's very interesting, and I found that connection very interesting. You should look him up if you're interested.
Just a nice guy in a sea of asshole cops.
It kind of seemed like it, yeah. He seemed like he was a good guy who was really trying to help people out and do the right thing.
A public servant, if you will.
Yeah, which...
Imagine.
Imagine. So the National Transsexual Counseling Unit also, they would help with ID cards. So you would have an identification. It wouldn't be like a official driver's license or whatever, but it would have an identification card for you so that if you were stopped on the street, you could be like, oh, I'm a patient of the National Transsexual Counseling Unit, and here's my ID. Like, and that was supposed to be like a...
Wow.
That
like
was supposed
in between.
Yeah, and it was supposed to be a protection, really. I'm sure in some circumstances it wasn't, depending on who the person was that...
Yeah, I'm interested to know like how much involvement they had with government to sort of say to people, you can present this as ID. Like...
And I think that it was mostly a San Francisco-based thing, but yes, the government, I mean, the police department was involved in it. That's kind of what this liaison with Elliot Blackstone was a part of. The National Transsexual Counseling Unit also like had some, in my opinion, maybe some icky things, because they kind of policed. They kind of were the sign-off to say if you could or couldn't qualify for sex reassignment. or gender affirming surgeries. And they would kind of be like, oh, you're not this enough, or you haven't been on, just kind of gatekeepy again, which
Yeah.
there's a similar organization now called WPATH, and same thing, like it's set up from a good place, it seems.
Is this like a
But-
national organization? WPATH?
WPATH is, yeah. Yep. It's it's standards of care, basically. So if you're going to be helping transgender people, these are the standards of care that you should follow, and it's kind of a rubric for...
They're the ones who state that you have to have a psych eval before you can have gender affirming surgeries.
Yeah, they've put up the whole
So are they like a
rubric
private organization, or are they like a government
world.
organization?
It's a world.
Oh.
Yeah, the W stands for world, and it's like a big.
It's a global...
It's a global thing, and I
Okay.
think
That's kind of hard because there are like cultural and social differences
Right.
between a lot of people, and it's hard to put everyone in one box before you can like.
Right. Well, and I
I
think
don't
some
know.
of those things, maybe some of the things are really progressive in certain countries.
Yeah.
And they're really limiting in other countries.
Yeah.
But the other thing about this is it's not. There's also an accreditation factor of it. Like when I had my gender affirming surgery, I specifically wanted to go to a WPATH approved physician because they have to.
They have some kind of training.
They have to meet certain.
Right.
So in some countries, I'm sure that even though this is a global thing, you don't have to go through that. And I'm sure even in the US, you could find organizations that are outside of that would be willing to do that. But so it's kind of it's not perfect either way. There's some
Right.
good and there's some bad. And that's probably to be said of the National Transsexual Counseling Unit.
Especially at that time.
At that time,
Yeah.
especially. And especially if you were like, San Francisco was kind of a pocket of queer people, really. Like the Castro was pretty cis and white and gay, and some of these other areas were not, but they were very queer still.
Well, and you're still sort of in the infancy of that whole...
The whole movement.
Well, the movement and the science and the psychology.
Yeah, for
Like-
sure.
You're still very early.
For sure. So, a couple of other things from the aftermath of these riots. It kicked off the founding of the San Francisco Trans March, which is still going strong today, and gives visibility, and that's a good thing. And then in 2006, there was a plaque erected to commemorate the riots right there in front of where the Compton's Cafe was. It's now, I learned this today, that building, the Compton's Cafe closed, I think, in 1976. And it's like some office for a private prison right now. So it's really empty. So the gays, the queers are trying to find a way to reclaim that building and have it maybe be a resource center for trans people or whatnot.
Or have it be a cafe that has $1.50 pancake special.
In
Yes!
San Francisco, I'm sure.
Yeah. That's
you
part
go.
of the resource center.
You get
government
you get
funding.
pancakes in
so
the
you
middle of the
can-
night.
Yeah, so you can give pancakes away for
Sometimes
free.
he needs a stack of pancakes in the
If
middle
you're-
of the night.
I'm just
always need a sack.
I'm being completely for real. If you're coming down off drugs and you just decided to end your night doing sex work, and you're checking on all your friends to make sure that everyone's still alive and not beaten up and healthy and fine, and you're sitting around for hours drinking coffee, you need a pancake.
I want pancake
Absolutely.
right now. In 2017, the city of San Francisco recognized the Compton's Transgender Cultural District, which is a really big deal. It's the world's first legally recognized transgender district ever.
Like an area?
Yeah, an area that's like
The majority
Filled with
is trans.
trans? People?
yes, like and it still to this day has a very heavily transgender population in that area.
Like Tenderloin?
Tenderloin district.
Okay.
Interesting.
So obviously this riot led to some good things, and it's really hard to pick apart the pieces of history and what all the mounting tensions were to lead to this and what led us to here. But it's kind of fun to see some of the milestones of things that happened. And I've heard this cafe riot being referred to as like, the beginning of the transgender
Revolution.
Yeah, revolution. The transgender revolution. And, they haven't always been included in the gay rights movement. Oftentimes there have been very far splits between the two groups. And, so there is a documentary film about this riot called Screaming Queens. The link will be in our show notes. It was directed by Susan Stryker. You can watch it on YouTube. The link will be in our show notes. It's very much worth watching. You guys should watch it. It's not too long. And that's the Compton's Cafe Riots. So
do we know what happened to the cafe, like, immediately, in the immediate future after this?
So apparently the next day, or very shortly after they had gotten the windows and things fixed, a crowd came back through because they stopped allowing trans. Like they got really discriminatory and like stopped allowing people in, and then all their glass and doors were broken again. But I don't really know what.
They didn't want to accept the neighborhood.
They didn't want to accept the neighborhood, and I think ultimately that probably
There was a lesson
hurt
to be
them.
learned, and they rejected it.
Yeah, they rejected it for sure. So, like I said, I think the cafe closed in 76, which was 10 years later, but I don't really know too much about it between those 10 years. So
I have a comment about Susan Stryker.
let's go for it.
I kind of have a crush on Susan Stryker.
Of course
I
you
have
do.
a comment before Susan Stryker.
Okay, go for the before Susan Stryker.
Marsha P. Johnson goes on stage and like advocates for trans rights. Mm-hmm. That's what I just thought of when you were talking about the Tenderloin in this new like district.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I was wondering what year that was because it was really early. But she was like getting booed.
Yeah,
and,
people
like,
were booing
people were
her.
like throwing shit and like just being really ridiculous.
Well, and I don't have the timeline, but I know she was like a big part of the Stonewall thing and in New York, and that was in 69. So I would think it was
69
around that
79.
time. Yeah. What was the comment about Susan Stryker?
I'm sorry.
Listen, I know this is going to go off the rails for a minute, but we just finished watching a show called Lady in the Dale. We've all seen it. It's on HBO. It's, to give a little context for everyone, it's about this trans woman who lived in the 1970s
80s.
is kind of when it took place, and who also was kind of a grifter, con artist, and ran into a lot of issues legally.
She came to fame as the CEO of like
Like
this,
just the boss.
the boss of this car company
Yeah.
who was marketing a 3-wheeled car because gas at the time was like really expensive, wasn't it?
There was
Sounds
like a gas
somebody needs to be making
shortage.
a Dale right now.
I know.
She was ahead of her time.
And there was a guy that was a newscaster in California, and his name was Dick Carlson. The news.
Oh my god, that fucking dickhead.
Yeah.
He was the worst.
He was the worst.
God.
The whole time
In
we're
the
like,
Lady in
this
the Dale.
fucking guy.
Tucker Carlson's father.
Father of Tucker
Ew.
Carlson.
Ew.
Of
Ew.
Fox
and they're
News.
both just fuckers.
And they're both just
Yes.
the most transphobic.
Yes.
Like his like life purpose was like to
Outing
ruin.
trans.
He should be our
Yeah.
boo.
He's the boo of the century.
He's the boo of the
well,
century.
Candace Owens is the boo of the century.
Yeah.
But he's the
pretty
boo
bad
of
too.
He's the boo of the 20th century.
He is the yuckiest yucky.
He just had some sort of like issue with
Well, I think
Liz.
he even
just
said
didn't believe.
that he and his like friend thought that
Yeah.
she was a he.
They were
Yeah,
out
like
to-
immediately.
Yeah, immediately.
Yeah, they were out to.
So then they did a bunch of stories on her and like
For, like,
tried
the
to
local
uncover
news.
the
Yeah.
whatever scandal
Something just
that.
wasn't right.
Yeah, it was kind of insane.
But it turns out that he continued to be a dick for the rest of his life, and he outed another trans woman who played tennis.
yeah, and I don't know what her name is, but
I don't remember her name, but he just had a thing.
and then he had a son whose name is Tucker and runs a huge like fucking show on Fox News.
Yeah.
Where he's also a dick.
Yeah. It runs in the family.
So I was doing some Googling because I was like, I want
After you
to
finish Lady in the Dale.
I want to read something about Dick Carlson.
Don't worry, he
Dick
seems like a
dickhead.
very sad man at this point in his life.
Yeah.
Don't worry.
He seemed like a really just like
Still a
miserable
dick,
person
even when
in
he's
his
old.
in the 70s when he was like at
Yeah.
the height of his career, just like obsessed.
But they just interview him
With
and he's
her.
just like,
Yeah.
yeah, still making transphobic comments.
Yeah.
He's just like a lizard that's lived too long.
Yeah.
Yes.
Seriously.
like
Yeah.
I hated the part where he's like, "Oh, they kept correcting me on the stand and told me
Oh,
to
I
use
know.
her, and I would do it like once, but then I was like,
I'm not
No,
going to
I
do
don't
that.
I
care.
don't
That's
believe
silly.
that."
Yeah. He
Fuck
was-
that guy. Okay.
We were getting really upset about that guy.
Well,
Yes.
We're
he's
still getting
Tucker
upset about that guy.
Carlson.
Let's let Alex make her point.
Okay, so my point is I happened upon an article that talked about Dick Carlson and how he was so afraid for his life that he thought that
Oh yeah,
Liz was going to come murder him.
Oh,
but there
my
were all those
God.
like hitman conspiracies going on.
Yeah,
though.
yeah. And maybe
So I'm not
I don't know.
saying.
Oh yeah.
Right.
Well, in the show, he was like, I always kept a gun in my
and like a
briefcase.
bulletproof
and
thing
had it
and
always
his
loaded and ready to
briefcase
go.
open.
Right.
Because I was afraid Liz was going to come in and try to kill me.
Or
So, like,
someone, yeah.
bro, like,
you're not that important.
you're not that important. Yeah.
So
She's
aside
trying to live her life.
aside from the like just blatant transphobia that this man had, Tucker Carlson grew up thinking that this trans woman was going to murder his father. And like so of course Tucker that like shapes his view of what being transgender means and like
Like in a bad way.
horrible way.
Yeah.
So the part that I'm getting to is I read this. It's in the same article, I think. But they were really criticizing the Lady in the Dale show about how. Susan Stryker says something about how if Elizabeth would have been born like just a couple decades later, that her whole life could have been different. And the person writing the article was like, so that implies that like the criminality is hand in hand with being transgender.
Oh my God. That is absurd.
And like that there's some sort of, I don't know.
That's
my whole
so
point.
Icky. That is so icky.
They're like, okay, yeah, like the show is interesting and like the story is cool, but Susan made this point that unravels anyone's argument about how whatever.
That is not an unraveling. That is that I don't like that.
And it was on like a big trustworthy publication, and that's why I clicked on the story to read it. Is I was like, okay, so it wasn't like the New York Times or anything, but it was, I don't know. It was really interesting.
And I see from my perspective, and I don't know Liz. I don't know her life.
Right.
And obviously she did some pretty wild things.
Yes.
But like with the whole Dale thing, it really did seem like it could have come together.
Yes.
It really did seem like she was being
Like this was her chance.
targeted. Like this was her chance to like get out of the mess that she had gotten into. And it to me, it felt like she's never been able to like authentically be herself. Of course she's a troubled person. She's been through a lot. Of course she fucking has.
She has like 10 children.
Yeah. Like of course she, and like this seemed like her chance, and I feel like they just like pulled the rug right out from under her.
Well, as soon as they were like, Liz is a libertarian, I was like, all these pieces, all the puzzle pieces make sense. Of course she didn't like get the right permits and put the money in the specific account
dicks.
and like, because that's the whole thing that they, spoiler, convicted her on, is like she didn't put this money into a specific escrow account from her customers, like to reserve a car, and instead she was using that money to like pay her workers, which
that doesn't
that's not
seem
that
absurd
crazy
to me.
Right.
I know that there are rules,
but libertarians don't like rules, and that makes sense to me. And like her flower business, how like people didn't have permits and people like she was just grabbing
people that
pretty
needed,
vulnerable people, but people that needed jobs and they needed a place to
Yeah.
live. So of course, like they're willing to accept this job of just like selling flowers.
right?
And that's like, you can tell when she started that flower business, it's like, that's what she had been looking for, is an opportunity like that when she was on the run.
Yeah.
She's like, I'm going to provide this for other people. Like, it almost felt like this is my way to give back. Like, for all those years I was running and looking for ways to make money and like support my family, I'm going to give that to someone else.
Yeah.
And rules are rules, but and I'm not a libertarian, and they're whatever. Like but I understand. It made a lot of sense to me. We've gotten off track.
No, I feel like this is I'm very interested in this dialogue. I feel like it has.
We need to do a whole episode on Lady and Adele.
It
We
just
should do that
reminded me of
soon.
like the one sentence in this one article that I read where it was like this thing that Susan Stryker said, like it pulls the whole like it
unravels this whole, and I don't
like it's a
agree
whole
with
Jenga
that at all.
tower
I don't
of
agree
whatever.
with that at
No,
all.
I don't
It's
either.
bullshit, because there's so many different ways you can take the meaning of that sentence, because it's like her life could have been so much different in 2 decades because she wouldn't have to have
Like scammed a bunch of people,
right, or like she wouldn't have had to do some of the things because she would have had different opportunities just with the advancement of time.
Well, and she wouldn't have been
Like-
able to like run away from her first couple of marriages without a trace.
Right.
Yeah, that's true too.
Like
right.
And maybe she would have been able to realize that she was a transgender woman a long time
Yes.
ago and saved
Yes.
herself years and years of
And
trouble
not even
and
been
trauma.
in any of those marriages because she could have transitioned earlier.
yes.
Yeah. So
I don't feel like you can just automatically place that statement around her crimes.
Yeah. Yes. Agreed.
All right, so
Sorry, I'm really sorry to take us off track.
No, I feel like that was very on track, actually.
Interesting. Thanks for sharing the story.
Yeah. So I'm gonna go move right along to some positive Who news this week. And that is that the American Medical Association has officially recommended that the Department of Birth Certificate issuing, whatever they're, it's health and vital
records
statistics.
or whatever.
Yeah, vital records. Yeah. Stop.
That'd be a great record store name.
That would be a great record store name, honey. That's a great idea. But so they've recommended that they stop putting sex, male or female, on birth certificates.
That's really interesting.
Yeah. So I mean, it's a really good, exciting starting place. It's probably gonna go through millions of Republican legislation battles, and it doesn't really mean anything quite yet, but it's a step in the right direction, and it removes barriers for trans people that are wanting to amend their birth certificate. Well, not even for trans people that want to amend their birth certificates. Like it would remove a barrier for so many things with, like, you know, you have to present your birth certificate to get a job, to start a family, to adopt a child, to get married. Like, there's so many things that your birth certificate creates a barrier for. And coming from a person who has gone through it all, it's a bitch to amend your birth certificate. It's really hard. So
they're like, hey, it shouldn't be a bitch.
yeah. So, and if it wasn't even on your birth certificate, if it was just your name and the hospital you were born at and whatever, then, like, that barrier is just gone. Yeah. So,
That's enough.
And kind of their whole point was, like, it's not needed on this document.
Well, because what do you need a birth certificate for? Like,
that's affiliated with,
right, like I assume that you need it to, like, get your kid enrolled in kindergarten or whatever.
yes, to get
And,
a
like,
kid in school.
if you need government assistance, I'm sure you need to, like,
Yes.
present that type of
For a passport.
a marriage.
Right, but, like, I'm just starting at the beginning of a baby's
of a child's life.
right?
Yeah, yeah.
And then, like, you have to fill out your W-4s. So, like, it's a piece of identification when you're trying to get employment.
Mm-hmm.
And then, like, to get married, to...
It's a very interesting thought, though.
Adopt a child.
When does gender matter?
Because there's nothing gender specific about any of those
I don't
things.
think it ever matters.
Right. And that's I mean, I think that's probably the point.
Yeah, I think so too. I think you're right.
Well, and I was listening to some podcast or read something, and all it is like the doctor just, like, looking at your newborn's body and deciding,
Oh, that's a dick.
yeah, like, and a lot of the times it's not very,
More or less.
it's, like, a little ambiguous because
Yes.
like, people's bodies don't look exactly the same.
Yes.
So, and you also can't tell, like, what's internal and what's external.
That's another important part of this, I think, because some of the criticism of this, maybe I shouldn't call it criticism, but just kind of like some of the conversation afterwards is like, this is great, this is a good step, but really what we want the American Medical Association to do is to bar doctors from performing surgeries on intersex children before they're of consenting age. Like, you might take off the wrong thing or fix the wrong thing, and it causes them a lifetime of hardship. So,
Well, and how do you, like, as a doctor or a parent, how do you feel comfortable making that choice? You haven't even met that person yet. They're a baby.
And it doesn't mean that you can't say, like, here's your baby boy. Like, it just
Right.
means that you're not putting that on a piece of paper that's going to, like, haunt someone for the rest of their life, potentially.
right, if that baby boy isn't really a boy.
Right.
Yeah.
And yeah, that's really interesting. And maybe doctors just consider it like to do these like newborn corrective surgeries, like let's spare parents like the
trouble of having
like,
a weird kid.
Yeah, of having a weird kid.
And I'm sure some parents feel that way too. Like, I just want to have a normal baby and raise them to have
Right.
a normal life. And so I'm just going to make this decision. And
God, normal's so overrated. Like, why is that?
Nobody's normal,
No
though.
one's normal. Like, why? I'm not going to go down that.
I'm trying to think of like when you would ever need a gender marker on your birth certificate still.
never. You don't.
Not now that, like,
Now that
gay
marriage. Yeah.
I think that was probably a thing.
The draft.
The draft. That's the only thing that perhaps I don't know. But,
Do you wanna know
but now
some-
they're opening up the draft to females, right? Like you can volunteer.
I don't feel like I have.
I don't know. The
information to
draft is
speak on this.
bullshit anyway.
But
so
what
who
about,
cares?
like, prisons? Prisons are still gendered.
Right.
But we shouldn't be thinking about prisons the moment a baby is birthed.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
What prison is this child
Yes!
potentially going to be
Like-
incarcerated
For
in?
the lady in the Dale, like
Yeah, that was
Yeah, that was
fucked
horrible.
up.
Horrible.
she wanted to go to a women's prison, and they put her in a men's prison, and she got
beat the shit out
beat
of her.
up.
There's another example. If Liz Carmichael would have been born 40 years later, it could have been Orange is the New Black, and she could have been in a woman's prison.
Yeah.
What character would she have been in Orange is the New Black, Lisa?
That
That's what I'm
fucking
very
crazy lady who, like,
crazy eyes.
yeah, no, not crazy eyes. No, the lady with the super stringy hair who, like, wears the
Natasha
Catholic
Lyonne?
necklace. Oh,
No.
it is. Is it Natasha?
No, Natasha Lyonne's like the
It's been so long since I
Yeah, it's
I
been
don't
a long
know.
time.
I'm
The-
Catholic
failing.
necklace.
Yeah, she's like, and like,
the crazy Christian, like
yeah, the crazy Christian
Baptist
lady. Yeah, that's who. That's
with
who.
the wild teeth.
Pennsylvania?
Yes,
Kentucky?
Pennsatucky.
Okay.
Yes, she was-
You don't see Liz,
Liz is
being
classy.
Pennsatucky.
Liz is classy as fuck.
Oh, man.
Yeah. Yeah, sorry. I was just trying to think of like when you would ever need that.
So last night, this is kind of funny. We had dinner with my brother last night, and we were just kind of talking about family dynamics, and he was like, well, you know what? You're fucking lucky that you were born female at birth, so you didn't have to deal with the pressure from mom and dad of going on a mission. And I was like,
Yep.
damn, that's heavy. Like, I guess,
He's like,
Cultural.
you transitioned at the right time
yeah.
after you were 19.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So,
that's a decent
Did
point.
your brother go on a mission?
no, and he got a lot of shit for it. Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
that's another story.
Yeah,
Another
we
story for
yuckies.
another day.
Yeah.
Yep.
Of that.
So I have the boo this week. My boo is horrible. It's there is a religious center at Virginia Tech University. It's called the Wesley Center, and it's an off-campus building. And they have been hanging pride flags and having like pride
Come one, come all.
themed items outside of their building. They have a Black Lives Matter bench. Like, it just seems like a very progressive organization.
Loving, yeah.
And it's a religious organization too. Like,
Welcoming all.
yes.
It's kind of what you wish the what do you call it in Utah?
The Mormon Church.
No.
Oh.
Jesus.
No.
in high school.
Seminary.
It's kind of
so
what
the
you
Mormon
wish
church.
seminary
like
was.
institute is the college version.
Yes. It's like in your wildest dreams what seminary might have been.
Seminary was just like church squared. It was exactly the same as
Seminary was a free period for me to go smoke weed in the park.
So what I'm saying is it sounds like this is sort of similar where it's university affiliated, but it's like a religious
off-campus
thing off campus.
Right.
And all seminary, they were off campus.
Yeah, they had
Like,
to be.
you had to cross the street
That's the separation of church and state.
to get there.
It's just a road.
A road.
So silly.
Yes.
So this place is, again, called the Wesley Center, and they've displayed a pride flag for a couple of years. And they said that they did this to make sure that their students felt safe and live out their faith and be affirmed in who they are.
That's nice.
Yeah, I think that's
great.
very nice. Unfortunately, on Saturday morning, this last Saturday, which would have been the
7th or 8th.
7th of August, the flags were taken down by an unknown person, and they replaced them with Confederate flags.
Way to take away feelings of safety.
Yeah, and also, like, not even just queer people and, like, LGBTQ community, but, like, people of color feel unsafe. And especially just even in the neighborhood walking by, that's...
So was
to
this like an
see-
act of vandalism, or was this someone within the organization?
It's an act of vandalism.
Okay.
So, as far as I'm aware, nobody has been identified or caught yet that did
Didn't
this.
it happen 3 times within like 2 weeks? I don't know if it was.
No,
like,
it was just
I don't think it
this
was
one
replaced
time.
by a Confederate flag every time, but it was like torn down multiple times and then replaced with the Confederate flag. And I remember reading a story that they keep pride flags like in reserve
Yeah.
because of how often.
To just replace it.
Yeah.
I mean, the story
sad.
says this was the latest vandalism.
Right. No, yes.
So-
yes, but
I don't know.
I thought there was like a run up to this like Confederate flag thing.
I'm not sure. I don't have that information. But
That's sad.
the police are investigating. Hopefully somebody's caught, and
And there's all these arguments about how the Confederate flag isn't inherently racist
or
or
hateful.
inherently
Bullshit.
bigoted.
Bullshit.
Right.
All right. Well, this has been Toasted Lavender Podcast. I would like to give a shout out to Casey, who's been helping us out with some final mastering, and we're very thankful for that. We've gotten some feedback in the past that in the car, some of our episodes weren't super loud, so Casey's helping us out. He's fixed that. Thank you, Casey.
You can listen to it in the car. You
yeah.
can listen to it at the gym. You
Yeah.
can listen to it in a plane full of crying
Headphones.
babies.
Cell phone, car, whatever. Music is by the lovely Cop Kid, and our logo is by Devi. And thanks for joining us today. We're here, we're queer, we're drinking beer.
Oh, yeah.
Cheers.
We need another one.
Yeah, we do.
Oh, what a fucking asshole.
Yeah, chat about it.
So, The Lady in the Dale is on Netflix.
It is not. So let's start over.
So, The Lady in the Dale is on
HBO.
Habo.